Chapter 9 of Greenmantle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Carl, St. Louis, Missouri, June 2007. Greenmantle by John Buchan. Chapter 9. The Return of the Straggler. Before I turned in that evening I had done some good hours' work in the engine room. The boat was oil-fired and in very fair order, so my duties did not look as if they would be heavy. There was nobody who could be properly called an engineer, only, besides the furnaceman, a couple of lads from Hamburg, who had been a year ago apprentices in the shipbuilding yard. They were civil fellows, both of them consumptive, who did what I told them and said little. By bedtime, if you had seen me in my blue jumper, a pair of carpet slippers, and a flat cap, all the property of the deceased Walter, you would have sworn I had been bred to the firing of river boats, whereas I had acquired most of my knowledge on one run down the Zambesi, when the proper engineer got drunk and fell overboard among the crocodiles. The captain, they called him Schenk, was out of his bearings in the job. He was a Frisian, and a first-class deep-water seaman, but since he knew the Rhine Delta, and because the German mercantile marine was laid on ice till the end of the war, they had turned him on to this show. He was bored by the business, and didn't understand it very well. The river charts puzzled him, and though it was pretty plain going for hundreds of miles, yet he was in a perpetual fidget about the pilotage. You could see that he would have been far more in his element smelling his way through the shoals of the Emsmouth, or beating against a northeaster in a shallow Baltic. He had 6 barges in tow, but the heavy flood of the Danube made it an easy job except when it came to going slow. There were 2 men on each barge, who came aboard every morning to draw rations. That was a funny business, for we never lay to if we could help it. There was a dinghy belonging to each barge, and the men used to row to the next and get a lift on that barge's dinghy, and so forth. 6 men would appear in the dinghy of the barge nearest us and carry off supplies for the rest. The men were mostly Frisians, slow-spoken, sandy-haired lads, very like the breed you strike on the Essex coast. It was the fact that Schenk was really a deep-water sailor, and so a novice at the job, that made me get on with him. He was a good fellow and quite willing to take a hint, so before I had 24 hours on board he was telling me all his difficulties, and I was doing my best to cheer him. And difficulties came thick, because the next night was New Year's Eve. I knew that that night was a season of gaiety in Scotland, but Scotland wasn't in it with the fatherland. Even Schenk, though he was in charge of valuable stores and was voyaging against time, was quite clear that the men must have permission for some kind of beano. Just before darkness we came abreast a fair-sized town, whose name I never discovered, and decided to lie to for the night. The arrangement was that 1 man should be left on guard in each barge, and the other get 4 hours' leave ashore. Then he would return and relieve his friend, who should proceed to do the same thing. I foresaw that there would be some fun when the first batch returned, but I did not dare to protest. I was desperately anxious to get past the Austrian frontier, for I had a half notion we might be searched there. But Schenk took his Silvesteraband business so seriously that I would have risked a row if I had tried to argue. The upshot was what I expected. We got the first batch aboard about midnight, blind to the world, and the others straggled in at all hours next morning. I stuck to the boat for obvious reasons, but next day it became too serious, and I had to go ashore with the captain to try and round up the stragglers. We got them all in but 2, and I am inclined to think these 2 never meant to come back. If I had a soft job, like a riverboat, I shouldn't be inclined to run away in the middle of Germany, with the certainty that my best fate would be to be scooped up for the trenches, but your Frisian has no more imagination than a haddock. The absentees were both watchmen from the barges, and I fancy the monotony of the life had got on their nerves. The captain was in a raging temper, for he was short-handed to begin with. He would have started a press gang, but there was no superfluity of men in that township, nothing but boys and grandfathers. As I was helping to run the trip, I was pretty annoyed also, and I sluiced down the drunkards with icy Danube water, using all the worst language I knew in Dutch and German. It was a raw morning, and as we raged through the riverside streets, I remember I heard the dry crackle of wild geese going overhead, and wished I could get a shot at them. I told one fellow, he was the most troublesome, that he was a disgrace to a great empire, and was only fit to fight with the filthy English. "God in heaven," said the captain, "we can delay no longer. We must make shift the best we can. I can spare one man from the deckhands. You must give up one from the engine room." That was arranged, and we were tearing back rather short in the wind when I espied a figure sitting on a bench beside the booking office on the pier. It was a slim figure in an old suit of khaki, some cast-off duds which had long lost the semblance of a uniform. It had a gentle face, and was smoking peacefully, looking out upon the river and the boats, and us noisy fellows with meek philosophical eyes. If I had seen General French sitting there and looking like nothing on earth, I couldn't have been more surprised. The man stared at me without recognition. He was waiting for his cue. I spoke rapidly in Sesotho, for I was afraid the captain might know Dutch. "Where have you come from?" I asked. "They shut me up in trunk," said Peter, "and I ran away. I am tired, Cornelius, and I want to continue the journey by boat." "Remember you have worked for me in Africa," I said. "You are just home from Damaraland. You are a German who has lived 30 years away from home. You can tend a furnace and have worked in mines." Then I spoke to the captain. "Here is a fellow who used to be in my employ, Captain Schenk. It's almighty luck we've struck him. He's old, and not very strong in the head, but I'll go bail he's a good worker. He says he'll come with us, and I can use him in the engine room." "Stand up," said the captain. Peter stood up, light and slim and wiry as a leopard. A sailor does not judge men by girth and weight. "He'll do," said Schenk, and the next minute he was readjusting his screws and giving the strayed revellers the rough side of his tongue. As it chanced, I couldn't keep Peter with me, but had to send him to one of the barges, and I had time for no more than 5 words with him, when I told him to hold his tongue and live up to his reputation as a half-wit. That accursed Sylvester band had played havoc with the whole outfit, and the captain and I were weary men before we got things straight. In one way it turned out well. That afternoon we passed the frontier, and I never knew it till I saw a man in a strange uniform come aboard, who copied some figures on a schedule, and brought us some mail. With my dirty face and general air of absorption in duty, I must have been an unsuspicious figure. He took down the names of the men and the barges, and Peter's name was given as it appeared on the ship's roll. Anton Blum. "You must feel it strange, Herr Brandt," said the captain, "to be scrutinized by a policeman, you who give orders. I do not doubt to many policemen." I shrugged my shoulders. "It is my profession. It is my business to go unrecognized often by my own servants." I could see that I was becoming rather a figure in the captain's eyes. He liked the way I kept the men to their work, for I hadn't been a nigger driver for nothing. Late on that Sunday night we passed through a great city which the captain told me was Vienna. It seemed to last for miles and miles, and to be as brightly lit as a circus. After that we were in big plains, and the air grew perishing cold. Peter came aboard once for his rations, but usually he left it to his partner, for he was lying very low. One morning, I think it was the 5th of January, when we had passed Buda and were moving through great sodden flats just sprinkled with snow, the captain took it into his head to get me to overhaul the barge loads. Armed with a mighty typewritten list, I made a tour of the barges, beginning with the hindmost. There was a fine old stock of deadly weapons, mostly machine guns and some field pieces, and enough shells to blow up the Gallipoli Peninsula. All kinds of shells were there, from the big 14-inch crumps to rifle grenades and trench mortars. It made me fairly sick to see all those good things preparing for our own fellows, and I wondered whether I could not be doing my best service if I engineered a big explosion. Happily, I had the common sense to remember my job and my duty, and to stick to it. Peter was in the middle of the convoy, and I found him pretty unhappy, principally through not being allowed to smoke. His companion was an ox-eyed lad, whom I ordered to the lookout while Peter and I went over the lists. Cornelius, my old friend.